A Giants podcast for Giants fans
by Giants fans.
It's Shaun Morash.
On the sideline, into the end zone. Touchdown, Giants!
From the offseason to the wins and the losses, it's time to take one Giant step.
Welcome into One Giant Step. Now that's what I'm talking about. One giant day. As NFL free agency began with the tampering, the legal tampering, the this, the that, your sister's ass, Giants making moves left and right. I'm Shaun Morash. He's Bryce Gelman. This is One Giant Step. Everywhere podcasts are available and free on the Audacy app. We are recording this on the evening of March 11th, 2024, around 9 o'clock p.m. All right, so the Rangers with a comfy lead on the Devils at the time of recording this. I say that because free agency is so active and so frequent that by the time you're listening to this, maybe something else has happened drastically. Although I feel pretty safe to say that whatever big stuff the Giants were going to do has been done, and the rest of the moves will be minor at that. Now, what a whirlwind of a day. Bryce Gelman, our co-host here and producer, Bryce Gelman. What a whirlwind of a day. So before we just say our hellos and everything, I think we should navigate this with the departures before we do the arrivals. However you want to frame this, like we're going to one giant step of an airport. Saquon Barkley.
I think we got to start with the negative and then end with the positive, the uplifting news. But
okay, so the first thing that really falls today is Saquon Barkley ends up signing with the Philadelphia Eagles. 3 years. He ends up getting $26 million guaranteed, somewhere north of $30 million per year. He gets pursued by the Texans, the Bears, and the Eagles, and the Giants never give him a formal offer. This, according to Ryan Dunleavy and others, with the thought that the Giants should go out there, see your worth, and come back to us. Now, it's kind of weirdly reported, but you get the sense that Saquon did go back to the Giants with this offer, and the Giants basically said, have fun in Philadelphia. This is clearly met with a lot of drastic views because for a lot of young fans, Bryce, and this is where I'm going to get curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
I'm a 36, soon to be 37-year-old Giant fan. I always had a sour taste in my mouth, not for Saquon the person, the player, or anything, but just Saquon the pick at second overall. And to me, he is the face, along with Daniel Jones, for right or for wrong, of kind of like a losing era, Dave Gettleman football, this, that, the other thing. And while they had that great moment in 2022, for the most part, it's been a lot of injury-riddled years. Saquon at Penn State was home run or nothing. That's kind of what he's been with the New York Giants. Missed a lot of time. And ultimately, while I thought he would be back, and I thought by not trading him that it was a signal he should be back, this is the right move, in my opinion, for the Giants not to match this, especially when we get to the moves that they've already done with some of that money that's been freed up. But I'm curious, Bryce, where do you stand? You're a younger Giant fan than me by a good 10 years. Saquon probably represents a little more to you than he would somebody of my age group. And hey, what are you feeling today?
So let me just say this, and I think I speak for a lot of younger Giants fans that when it happened, there was a reactive response. Like you saw that news and you're like, seriously, this guy, he's gonna leave in the division. He's gonna leave to our most hated rivals. I think arguably the Eagles have surpassed the Cowboys. The Cowboys don't win anything. The Eagles have been more successful against us. I probably can't say it. I can't even remember the last time we beat the Cowboys. But I think just like from a younger Giants fan, I hate the Eagles so much more than I hate the Cowboys because the Cowboys we know are going to falter at the end of the day.
I do too, by the way. For the record, I'm with you. I hate the Eagles more than the Cowboys, but not that I like the Cowboys, obviously.
No, but like you understand. Let me just say this: a lot of my friends, they sounded like Frank the Tank earlier on in the day. With what was happening with the Giants. Like, the season's over. He canceled the season. Saquon's our most important player. We should have paid him. I'm like, hold on. Let's relax. Let's look at this situation objectively. Let's look at the fact that the Eagles are paying a running back, a 27-year-old running back, potentially $38 million over 3 years, which I think is absolutely absurd. We talked about that earlier today. Sure. When you knew this news beforehand, there was already reports of it, obviously, but I just didn't want to accept it. I don't want to come to terms with the fact that Saquon would leave within the division. He eventually does. Objectively, Shaun, this is one of the best moves that Joe Schoen has made in a long time. And I guarantee you, even if Saquon went back to the Giants and said, hey, look at what I just got offered. The Giants definitely laughed at him, said, enjoy, go to Howie, and have fun playing for the most scum fans in all of football.
Now, this is where I'm going to partially defend the Eagles, I guess, to an extent. I think it's silly for any team to pay this kind of money to a running back at this point. And by the way, the Eagles have been a damn good rushing team without a Saquon Barkley. We've seen the last couple of years, whether it's DeAndre Swift in there, the year before Miles Sanders, they've had a good running back by committee. But they have fallen short. This year, they completely collapse. The year before, they make a Super Bowl, lose to the Kansas City Chiefs. If they have the cap space to make it work, clearly they got Bryce Huff from the Jets, good pass rusher. They're probably going to shop Hassan Reddick now. If they felt on offense they were a premier running back away, bless their hearts if that's their all-in move. And kind of like the 49ers or Christian McCaffrey, right? Like, this is why drafting a running back second overall is silly, or high in the first round is silly. You wait for these kind of moves if they're your finishing touch. So the Philadelphia Eagles clearly think this is a finishing touch, and whether it is or not will remain to be seen. I personally think it won't be. And here's the hard truth about Saquon, which is kind of like a weird thing where Giant fans have gone with each other. It's not blaming him for the injuries he's had, but Saquon Barkley is an oft-injured, injury-riddled, injury-prone, any way you want to say it, player. He's played exactly one full season. Now, 2022, he didn't play a full season, but that was the last game. They rested all the starters. So it's kind of like a wink-wink. He's had 3,000-yard rushing seasons. He has not been this elite pass catcher. That's been one of the biggest misses, that he's this big pass-catching running back. Yeah, he's been a factor at times, not perfect. Has he run behind bad Giant offensive lines? Clearly. Clearly he has. But ultimately, this is just not good business to pay a running back that kind of money. And if the argument is, well, what are the Giants going to do offensively without Saquon? My rebuttal back would be, number one, it wasn't like they had a brilliant offense, and that's the reason why. Number two, as you're entering year 7 of Saquon's career, I sure as hell hope that Joe Schoen has a plan a la a wide receiver in the first or second round, continuing growth from Wandell. This is a good scheme here that Dable and Kafka hopefully can continue on. Build up in the trenches and give some plays some time to develop, and go from there. So, look, if the Eagle fans want to celebrate this as a win, bless them. Maybe it is in their mind. I personally think that this is a benefit to the Giants. And yes, the salary cap can be a myth, but it also isn't. You are done spending at some time. It's not a free-for-all. And as we've clearly seen with the allocation the Giants have to put out elsewhere, I would much prefer not north of $10 million on Saquon Barkley in his 7th year, and instead a couple offensive linemen, a big-time pass rusher, and so on and so forth. So I think win for the Giants. The only negative would be, and Tiki and Evan argued about this big time on our show, Evan and Tiki on the Fan, which would be, would the Giants locker room have cratered had they entertained trade calls for Saquon last year? Tiki seems very emotional and steadfast that in a locker room it would have. Okay, I mean, I guess I have to trust him there. I mean, he's the guy who's been in the room. I still say it wouldn't have hurt to pick up the phone. You did for Leonard Williams and put him in a spot like that. But that's out the door. The Giants let Saquon walk for nothing. They got that last year of the franchise tag. It was a season that didn't go their way, and so on and so forth. Now, Tiki did say, which has boomed and gone viral there, Bryce, Saquon's dead to us as Giant fans. And he kind of said it tongue-in-cheek if you listen to the actual audio and didn't read it in print. Because, look, when you sign with a rival with the Eagles, it doesn't mean not go get your bag. Go get your money, Saquon. It doesn't mean you can't go sign with the Eagles. But part of that is, whatever legacy you thought you had, once a Giant saying all the right things, it is out the window. You are now a highly paid player on a really good Eagle team. You're dead as far as the Giant big-time legacy goes. And, even if it's temporarily, and Saquon has clapped back, really gotten so personal about it with Tiki, which I think is complete nonsense. Tiki was just speaking how most Giant fans should feel. You're dead to us.
Tiki's one of the most soft-spoken, nice people. Listen, I've never met him personally, but everything I have heard about the guy is he's one of the nicest guys ever. And you could look back on his Twitter feed in early January when Saquon was up for Walter Payton Man of the Year. Guess who was trying to help him win that? Tiki Barber. So
I know he was,
and I'm sure they had a relationship. I'm sure that they had some conversations. And Tiki's not a guy to come out and say, you're actually dead to us. Like, we understand. And that was going to be my question to you. But like, what is? And I'll ask you it. I'll ask you it straightforward. What do you think Saquon's legacy is with the Giants going forward? Let's look 10 years down the line. Looking back, what was he for the New York Giants?
I think that there will be a portion of fans much younger than me, I'm talking 10, 15 years younger, who will always love Saquon Barkley in a very lighter way than people my age love, like Don Mattingly with the Yankees. Never won anything, had that one playoff run, and you kind of look at him as the best player on a really bad era of football. But ultimately, I think as a whole, it's kind of that. He's a face of a losing era of Giant football. Whether you consider that like, warm and fuzzies, that's one thing. But I come from an era with the Eli era where they won a lot of football. Before that, kind of that Kerry Collins, Tiki Barber stuff where they made a Super Bowl. This is some of the worst football I've seen in my life, and Saquon's a big part of it. And again, not Saquon's fault that the Giants took him,
Exactly. Yeah.
but them using a second overall pick and not even entertaining trading back or not taking Quentin Nelson or Josh Allen that's how he's going to be remembered, as an enormously failed resource of a draft pick. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the truth. I really believe that, Bryce.
I think that there was like a certain like empathy that you felt for the guy, like being such a champion of everything, being such a great face for the organization, doing all the great things that he did within the community. I think that all goes out the window now. I mean, he took his bag, he sold out, he accepted the money. Good for him. I'm not going to root. Listen, he's an Eagle. Yeah. I'm rooting against him, but I'm not rooting against him personally. If he has a great year and the Eagles lose, so be it. Good for him. He took his money. He made that decision. He sold his soul, good for him. But at the end of the day, as a younger Giants fan who, again, has associated him with some awful years of Giant football, he is going to be the face of that now. And he took the bag and he went to the Philadelphia Eagles. That's it.
Now, another guy who took a bag is Xavier McKinney. And we could talk about that real briefly. This isn't to be expounded upon greatly. I had said, whether I said this on air, off air, I believe this to be true. I was going to be fine either way. If Xavier McKinney was back with the Giants, cool. I'm on board. He played every snap last year as a defensive leader. If he was gone, I also understood it, because in many ways, nothing convinced me more that the Giants can move on than losing Julian Love and Jason Pinnock being a player. McKinney is not Troy Polamalu. McKinney's a very good player who, he hurt the Giants greatly with that ATV accident and missing those games a year before. Easily replaceable? I don't think easily replaceable. Clearly, it's another hole for the Giants, and maybe one that they use their second-round pick or third-round pick on, or maybe Dane Belton steps up, something like that. The Giants are clearly going to need to fill that void at safety. But ultimately, the money he got from Green Bay, we're talking about $17 million a year, and I know the cap exploded. That's a lot of money for a very good, not great player. And I know free agency is about overpaying, but man, when you look at some of the holes the Giants had, spending $17 million on a guy like McKinney, worth it? Again, if you want to say the cap's a myth, there is some max to it. If the Giants are trying to build this thing right, I think you could find closer to Xavier McKinney again in one of the next two drafts and not spend $17 million a year, Bryce.
That's the thing about Saquon and McKinney. That at the end of the day, are they really good football players? Yes. But are they expendable on a team that needs so much more to win, especially when you have to overpay them to bring them back? And I think that they are expendable. I think you can go out, you find a Devin Singletary, which I'm assuming we'll get to at some point.
Right.
Again, as you said, you'll find a guy in the draft. You'll draft the safety. It would have been nice to see Xavier McKinney and Shane Bowen's defense, but we're going to have to find someone else who could fill that void. But at the end of the day, and we're going to get into it, the Giants addressed the needs that they needed to address the most. And safety and running back, they pale in comparison to the defensive and offensive lines, especially considering what the Giants have been. And there's this one thing that I've had, and I think that it's true for all sports. It's like some specific franchises need to win a certain way. If you look at the Knicks, hard-nosed defense, 90s Knicks, all that they had to do to win, to come close to winning. And now look what they're back at right now with Tom Thibodeau. They play a hard-nosed defense. They have heart. The Giants, how do they win? By having the best defensive line, by getting to the quarterback, by being game wreckers on defense. They address that need. They are closer to winning with the moves that they made today than they were yesterday, and than they were at the start of last year. And I know that's a tough thing for Giants fans to digest. Losing Saquon Barkley, losing Xavier McKinney, a top 10 safety in the league. He was emerging as one of the best safeties. He's paid as a top 5 safety in the league. But you didn't need those guys to win. You needed guys elsewhere, and you addressed those needs, Shaun. So
yeah, no doubt about it. You know what? I equate Xavier McKinney and Saquon Barkley to like a kid who loses his pacifier. That's the thing that comforts you. That's the thing that, but it's okay to go about this a different way. Now, what did the Giants add? Before we get to the big swing trade by Joe Schoen, the Giants came out of day one of free agency with not one, but two, in theory, starting offensive linemen and a veteran running back to replace Saquon Barkley. Let's start with the running back real quick. Devin Singletary, a guy who played with Brian Dable in Buffalo, a guy that Joe Schoen was a part of drafting, was the guy who played with the Texans last year, C.J. Stroud. Similar enough numbers to Saquon Barkley a year ago. He's clear. I know I just ragged on Saquon in the pass catching game. Devin Singletary is not that. But Devin Singletary, in terms of if the Giants use a 4th-round pick, a 5th-round pick on a running back, and they have Eric Gray, can you put together a running back by committee where Devin Singletary is the lead back and figure with between 2 or 3 guys get similar enough production to what Saquon gave you? Yeah, you can.
Absolutely.
Especially at the cost you got for Devin Singletary. So I'm totally on board. It's, one of those analytical things. You start adding up the numbers, everybody gives you a little bit different, and Singletary could be a good pass blocker too, in pass protection. I'm fine right off the bat, Bryce. Devin Singletary, I think a good, nice veteran answer to whatever committee they're going to build here.
He was a stud at the end of the year last year. I mean, he completely replaced Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce, first off, I drafted him in fantasy. Worst pick I made in a long time. He was awful. He was awful. He was averaging like 1.5 yards, 2 yards per run. They put Singletary in, and look what he did. He became the top running back in a tough running back committee to break apart from the rest in. And he did that, and the Giants brought him in at half the price of Saquon Barkley. I have no complaints. This is what they needed to do. If you turn down Saquon Barkley, if you turn down bringing back one of the top running backs in the league, he wants to get paid like one of the top running backs in the league, you bring in a guy at less value and who could also replace some of the production that you lose by losing a guy like Saquon Barkley. And that's what they did. So I'm happy.
And giant football at its best is about building the trenches, right? And we've been screaming and yelling about the offensive line. Do I think the offensive line is 100% cured today? No. Do I think the Giants took a huge step towards at least giving us adequate offensive line play? I do. So now keep in mind, the Giants have an all-pro left tackle in Andrew Thomas. Evan Neal, more on him in a second. Is he going to kick inside the guard? Is he going to play right tackle? They clearly are not giving up on that investment just yet. And they used a 2nd-round pick on John Michael Schmitz. This to go with a 3rd-round pick, top 100 pick on Josh Azudu the year before, but they played him out of position last year. He got hurt. So what did the Giants do today? In a robust guard market where a lot of money was flying, they end up getting a very team-friendly deal with John Runyon Jr. His father, of course, was a big rival of Michael Strahan, former Eagle. Runyon Jr., a Packer guard that played his best football at left guard before last year kicking over to right guard, only allowed 2 sacks. I give Tiki credit. He did a little deep dive homework. The 2 sacks were both coverage sacks. This is important. One of them coming against Aaron Donald, of all people. So, again, step forward for the Giants, a good veteran guard like this, and John Runyon, clearly miles better than Mark Lewinsky. I'll take it. They also add the Raiders' starting right tackle from the last 2 years, Jermaine Illuminor. Okay, now he is a guy that's bounced around. He's a former 5th-round pick, Ravens, Patriots. Carmen Brasillo, who was the offensive line coach for the Raiders, coached him the last couple of years, also was in New England when he had him. So this is a guy that's followed Carmen Brasillo around. And, oh, by the way, look at this. We talk about flyers on offensive linemen in late rounds. This is clearly a guy who has developed the last couple of years and become, I talked to 2 Raider fans I know that watch him, and they said, look, he's taken some silly penalties, but ultimately he is not a turnstile at right tackle, which can we all sign up for that? Not a turnstile. And one of 2 things is going to happen here with Illuminor. Either he's going to flat out become the Giants starting right tackle in Evan Neal kicking to the inside at the other guard opposite John Runyon, or Evan Neal is going to progress, be the right tackle we thought, and Illuminor becomes, at 2 years, $14 million, the swing tackle on this team, a position they did not have filled until Tyree Phillips came later on in the year. Remember, that's how Azudu ended up playing left tackle. So either the Giants have a new starting right tackle, or at the very least have an enormous upgrade at swing tackle, which was also a position, to go with a starting guard. And if you start looking around and Evan Neal does have a place at the other guard and Runyon starting at guard and John Michael Schmitz takes the next step, and then you get Illuminor at tackle And obviously Andrew Thomas at tackle. And we have a Zudu now who's still in the mix to maybe be the backup guard. And they could use a draft pick. Suddenly you look at these two signings and you go, geez, the Giants got a little quality and got way deeper on the offensive line. Again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is, 5 all-pros starting. But I have high hopes for John Michael Schmitz, and I definitely am in on Runyon and Illuminor for that price in what's the offensive line market. Things are looking up. It just looks like the quality is finally starting to come together, and it was a good day for the Giants in the trenches, Bryce.
What has it been? Like 8 years, 9 years?
Longer.
The Giants
you
had
probably,
a solid.
You probably in,
I was like 10, 11. But they last won the Super Bowl. I mean, they had a pretty solid.
You were in
offensive
Paw
line,
Patrol onesie pajamas, Bryce. The last time the Giants didn't have an offensive line problem,
and like that's only like slightly an exaggeration. Like we're looking back 10 years at the last time the Giants had a serviceable offensive line. This is extremely important. Like this has been their biggest need, and they finally addressed their biggest need. It's unfortunate now that the Giants couldn't field the solid offensive line for Saquon Barkley. The second they get rid of him, they signed 2 very solid offensive linemen. You get a right tackle. He could be potentially your starting right tackle at 2 years, $14 million. Yeah. Shaun, do we have Jalen Brunson 2.0? Do we have another incredible New York
let's calm
deal?
down.
I know
let's calm down on making Jalen Brunson. Bryce.
Do we have a Dante DiVincenzo type deal?
All right, that's a good thought. Could
That's
it be
a good
Dante
one, right?
DiVincenzo for the Giants? And by the way, could he stink? Sure. But Tiki's hammered this home big time. Tiki getting a lot of love here on One Giant Step about the coaching difference. This is a direct descendant of Carmen Bracilla, the offensive line coach you just had. So I can only trust that, maybe the kid continues to get better and better. He also tweeted Illuminor that the first game he ever watched, NFL game, was the Giants-Dolphins 2007 in Wembley in London, which was kind of cool. By the way, Cleo Lemon started that game for Miami. What an ugly rain game that was. Eli Manning running it in. So I thought that was kind of cool. But by the way, we are now, 22 minutes into a podcast about the Giants and about free agency and about the offseason. And we have not yet touched on what's actually the biggest move, bigger than Saquon Barkley leaving. And that is Joe Schoen, arguably making the splash of the first day of NFL free agency in form of a trade. Trading the Giants' second overall pick. What is that? 39 overall, 37 overall. Yeah. A 5th-round pick swap and a 5th-round pick of their own next year, I believe. And in return, the Giants get Carolina Panthers pass rusher Brian Burns, taken 16th overall in the 2019 draft. 1 pick ahead of Dexter Lawrence.
Would have been the pick.
Right. He was one of those pass rushers up there with Josh Allen when people were screaming about the Giants taking Daniel Jones. And he has averaged just over a sack every 2 games in his NFL career. In 2022 with 12.5 sacks, a little step back in the sack world last year. The Giants get a pass rusher and then pay him, by the way, a 5-year deal with $86 million guaranteed, $150 million potentially. Bottom line is this, Bryce. Pass rushers, the good ones, rarely become available in free agency. You see the money Bryce Huff got, and he's not a guy who plays the run like Burns does. Rarely become available in free agency. If you draft a good one, normally you probably keep a good one unless it gets towards the end and you're in a rebuild in the trade. The Carolina Panthers are a dumpster fire that refused 2 first-round picks a year ago for Burns and now trade him for a 2 and a 5. Essentially the same kind of deal that the Giants traded Leonard Williams for. They traded Leonard Williams for this kind of deal. And they get Burns to pair him with Kayvon Thibodeau. Tibbs, we expect to take another step in year 3. We're a pro Thibodeau podcast here. Azeez Ojulari now can go back. Maybe the Giants shop him, but maybe he just becomes their 3rd pass rusher. The days of Jihad Ward having to be that second edge are over. And now the Giants, who just improved on the offensive trenches, on the defensive trenches, will have these 2 outside edge pass rushers together in Burns and Thibodeau to go with Dexter Lawrence in the middle and whatever else they do with D-tackle. It is hard not to be giddy. When you look at the way the 49ers have been built, even at times the Eagles, the good teams when we think about, oh man, are they a quarterback away? All these other teams that figure it out with the other quarterbacks and none of the elite quarterbacks figure it out in the trenches. What a swing by Joe Schoen. I'm all in. I know they paid him a ton of money, but you have to do that. I would rather allocate big time money to a pass rush position than a running back position, than a safety position. So when you think about losing McKinney and Saquon, if the payoff is 2 starting offensive linemen and Burns at big money at the end, Bryce, I'm giddy about this move, man.
Shaun, everything has changed. Everything has changed for the Giants. Some positives, some negatives, but mainly positive. We're looking at, as I said before, a Giants team who has struggled with both their offensive and defensive lines. Interior, like you got the top defensive lineman, the top defensive tackle in all of football this year in Dexter Lawrence. Now you pair him with a guy on the edge like Brian Burns. Like there is no possible negative outcome that you could take away from this. There's no takeaway.
Can't double everybody.
Negative from
Can't
this.
double Dex Burns and Thibodeau all at the same time.
And the biggest winner of this is Kayvon Thibodeau. Like, because you take away all of the attention off of you and all the pressure that he's faced, especially from you guys on the fan.
Dude, but if he cooks,
you take away all that.
Bryce, if he cooks early in the year, all the attention's going to go to him, and then Burns is free. So I'm talking you can't double
Burns.
everybody.
That's the thing. I mean, the entire face of this defense has changed, like in one fell swoop. And I think that, again, I said this when we got on the podcast together, that it could have been worse. And I think I was not as hyped up as I am right now going into this podcast, because as a younger Giants fan, I was focused on the guys that I grew up watching. They're losing Saquon Barkley, losing Xavier McKinney. But when they made this trade, everything changed. And they may be done in free agency, whatever. We'll see what they do in the draft. Fingers crossed they don't draft J.J. McCarthy. But as of right now, this is a very solid move. These are financially smart moves, not just like, all right, yeah, they took a big swing. I mean, they did pay Brian Burns a lot of money.
Yeah, but that's a position you pay a lot of money to.
Exactly. You're not giving it to a running back and a safety. You gave it to a defensive end. And this is huge for the Giants going forward. And listen, as upset as I was earlier, the second they made that move, everything changed.
So what's left? As we stand right now, maybe what I list what's left will already be signed by the time you listen to it. They still have not addressed the backup quarterback position. By the way, Gardner Minshew went to the Raiders. Jacoby Brissett went to the Patriots. As it stands right now, that also tends to make you think Joe Schoen was very outspoken about adding a quarterback, that play will come in the draft, whether it's the first round pick, the second round pick, whatever happens, the Giants are very much in play for a quarterback. And whatever veteran they sign now definitely won't prohibit them. So I expect that to be big in the draft. I would expect wide receiver still to be in play in the draft. I know you can't fill every hole. First and second picks, quarterback, wide receiver wouldn't shock me in the least, especially now that they've addressed pass rush and offensive line this way. The other thing I would say, cornerback. Darius Williams was with them. We haven't heard anything at the time of this. That was the veteran with the Jaguars. Not sure how much money is left on the cap. If they could backload some deals, maybe restructure Andrew Thomas or Dexter Lawrence. But cornerback, who's starting opposite Deonte Banks with Dory Jackson being a free agent? That's still, to me, I think a big hole that I would prefer free agency fill than have to use a first or second round pick on. What were you going to say, Bryce?
Let me ask you this, because there are a bunch of different routes and avenues the Giants can go in this draft. And we'll talk about it more as these weeks progress. We were about a month and a half out from the draft in Detroit. What would you prefer? The Giants pick the quarterback 6 overall, or the Giants trade up, or the Giants take Odunze, or let's say, who knows, they might trade up for Marvin Harrison Jr., or they might get elite neighbors. What would you prefer? Like, let's say just straight up, wide receiver first, quarterback later, quarterback first, wide receiver later.
So it's kind of a trick question, and I don't mean not to answer it. If I had my perfect world, the Giants have identified and found their franchise quarterback in round 1, and they've taken him. However, I've learned my lesson, okay? And you can't force something that's not there. If the Giants don't have conviction in whatever quarterback is left at 6th, if like whatever 3 quarterbacks they like, let's say go. For instance, like me and you both in lockstep, we don't love J.J. McCarthy. If he's the 4th quarterback left and he's still sitting there at 6 and the Giants take him, I hope they take him because Joe Schoen and Brian Dable have identified what they like and what they can work with. Forget what Shaun, Morash, or Bryce Gelman think. And they're not just taking him because they think they have to take a quarterback. They can't miss with their first round pick this year. They can't miss. So if it's a quarterback, it better be one they've identified and love. If not, take that best player, which is probably at 6 if 3 quarterbacks have gone, one of the 3 wide receivers. And I'm totally, totally fine with that. And if that means, I would go a step further, man. If you get to round 2 and you have your choice between like a monster D tackle or a legitimate starting corner or Bo Nix, like to me, I wouldn't even waste my time with Bo Nix at that point. I just keep pounding and building the trenches and build the team and then roll out some kind of form of Daniel Jones. If you have to run it back with DeVito and Taylor and then trade up next year for Quinn Ewers or something, that's fine. Again, preference is quarterback, but don't just take a quarterback because that's where you're sitting at 6 and you feel you have to. You got to come out of there with a player.
I think they need to roll with the punches. The last thing we'll talk about. I think they need to roll with the punches. I think they need to understand the position that they're in. I think they need to understand they also just gave up one of their second-round picks, and they're going to have less to try to move up with.
Right.
By
the way, Bryce, not to interrupt you, I mentioned Bo Nix. I am tentatively intrigued by Michael Penix. If that was,
I am too, 100%.
You could sell me on Penix more than Nix if he was sitting there or they traded up in the second round, whatever happened.
So you do that, you completely devalue Andrew Thomas because now you don't have one of the best tackles in the game protecting your quarterback's blind side.
Oh, Bryce,
the right tackle,
Bryce. We could do a whole one giant step after the draft on whether you move Andrew Thomas to right tackle in that spot. Come on, man, that's programming, baby.
We can, and we'll talk about that. We'll have these discussions, and this was only meant to be like a preliminary discussion right now because I'm thinking about it. I'm sure you're thinking about it. I'm sure a lot of other Giants fans out there are thinking about it because as of right now, it's a tough situation where the Giants are at 6 because they have needs, and their needs aren't necessarily going to be easily filled at the 6th overall draft. And I saw this floated out. This is the one last thing I promise. The one last thing we'll talk about is what if the Giants traded up to 4 and drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. and they traded for
I wouldn't do that.
Justin Fields. Trade for Justin Fields. I'm telling you, I think that this is
how many assets you got?
The best
you already
value
traded,
they'll get.
You already traded one of your second round picks. Now you're going to trade picks for Fields, trade up for Marvin Harrison.
How much is it going to cost to get Justin Fields? It's going to be a 3rd round pick at this point. There aren't that many teams out there that need a quarterback at this point.
So I could definitely hear that argument, but now you're talking about a lot of movement, a lot of trades, and a lot of picks. And I'm not trading up for Marvin Harrison. As good as he is, remember the Bills that when you traded up for Sammy Watkins in a draft that had 1 million receivers and they regretted it. If you're sitting at 6th and 3 quarterbacks are already going, you're going to get one of the 3 big receivers. You don't have to trade up for Marvin Harrison. So I would not do that. Fields for a 3rd round pick. I could hear the argument. Put it this way. Whatever the Giants decide to do at quarterback, chances are they're going to get a sucker and a believer out of me. And if that's Fields, even if it's McCarthy, who I don't like, because I have maybe it's blind faith, blind trust. I like this regime and where it's headed, and I trust that they're identifying the right guys. And with that, Bryce, I'm going to go to bed, and I'm going to let this podcast marinate over all of you. And look, at some point, maybe next week we pop in, we do a little roundup, a little cleanup on what the Giants figured out for the second half of free agency. And then we full steam ahead this thing to the draft, buddy. How does that sound?
Sounds good, Shaun. Listen, this is an exciting time. It is.
Oh,
I was not excited when I got into this podcast, but I'm excited. Listen, if it's another rebuilding year, fine, so be it. They're setting the foundation to be successful 2 years, 3 years.
And they're going to be a pain in the ass to teams defensively with that pass rush. They absolutely will.
Right.
He's Bryce Gelman, at Bryce Gelman, where you can find him on Twitter, at Shaun Morash, where you can find me. One Giant Step. Download, subscribe. Now's the time to do it. If you like what you heard, subscribe to One Giant Step, either free on the Audacy app, everywhere you get podcasts. Do that. So every time one of these bad boys drops, you get a little ding, 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 a little alert. Come your way. Listen to Shaun and Bryce chop it up. The weeks I'm not here, Bryce is here. Thank you to everybody for coming through in this offseason. Time to get giddy about the Giants again. Thank you for taking one giant step with us.